Hello, friends. Today we are talking about a man who commanded more soldiers than almost anyone else in the Second World War. A man who was arrested 3 times by the Allies and released 3 times. A man who served Hitler faithfully for years, watched Germany collapse around him, and died quietly in his bed at the age of 75. Most people know his name. Very few people know his full story. This is Gerd von Rundstedt, and his story is more complicated, more troubling, and more interesting than almost anything you have heard about him. Gerd von Rundstedt was born on December the 12th, 1875, in Aschersleben, a small town in Prussia. He came from a military family with roots going back centuries. His father was an officer, his grandfather was an officer, his great-grandfather was an officer. For the von Rundstedt family, military service was not a career, it was a birthright, it was identity, it was everything. He entered the Prussian army as a cadet at the age of 14. By the time most young men are finishing school and figuring out what to do with their lives, Gerd von Rundstedt already knew exactly who he was and what he was going to do. He was going to be a soldier, and he was going to be one of the best. He served in the First World War as a staff officer. He was not a frontline hero in the traditional sense. He was a planner, a thinker, someone who understood how armies moved, how logistics worked, how battles were won not just in the field, but on paper, weeks before the fighting started. He was good at it, exceptionally good. And when Germany lost the war in 1918 and the Kaiser abdicated and the old empire collapsed, von Rundstedt was one of the officers who stayed, who rebuilt, who kept the professional military tradition alive through the chaos of the Weimar Republic. By the time Hitler came to power in 1933, von Rundstedt was already one of the most senior and respected officers in the German army. He was 57 years old. He had spent his entire life in uniform, and he had very complicated feelings about the new regime. He was not a Nazi. He never joined the party. He found Hitler personally distasteful in many ways. He was an old Prussian aristocrat, and Hitler was a corporal from Austria who talked too much and knew too little about real war. That was how von Rundstedt saw it. And yet he stayed, and yet he served. And that decision, that choice to remain and to fight for a regime he privately disdained, is the central question of his entire life. He was briefly forced into retirement in 1938 after a dispute over military strategy. Hitler was purging senior officers who questioned him. Von Rundstedt was among those pushed out. He went home. He was 62 years old. Many men in that situation would have been relieved, would have been grateful for the excuse to step away. But von Rundstedt was not relieved. He was restless. And when Hitler called him back for the invasion of Poland in 1939, he came immediately. No hesitation, no conditions. He came back because this was all he knew. This was all he was. In Poland, he commanded Army Group South. The campaign lasted 5 weeks. Poland was crushed. Von Rundstedt performed brilliantly as a commander, coordinating massive armored and infantry movements across hundreds of miles. And then came France. The invasion of France in May 1940 is still studied in military academies around the world. It was one of the most stunning military victories in modern history. A nation that had held Germany to a stalemate for 4 years in the First World War was defeated in 6 weeks. And von Rundstedt played a central role. He commanded Army Group A, the force that executed the famous drive through the Ardennes forest, the move that cut off the Allied armies in Belgium and drove them to the sea at Dunkirk. And here's where history gets complicated. Because it was von Rundstedt, along with Hitler, who issued the famous halt order at Dunkirk. The order that stopped the German armored advance and allowed over 300,000 British and Allied soldiers to be evacuated across the English Channel. Historians have debated this decision for 80 years. Some say it was Hitler's decision alone. Some say von Rundstedt recommended the halt for legitimate military reasons, worried about overextended supply lines and the condition of his tanks. Some say it was the greatest mistake of the entire war. Whatever the truth, those 300,000 soldiers who escaped at Dunkirk went on to form the core of the army that eventually fought its way back across Europe and into Germany. Von Rundstedt was at the center of that decision. After France, he was promoted to Field Marshal, one of 12 men promoted on the same day in July 1940, in one of Hitler's grand gestures of celebration. Von Rundstedt was now at the very top of the German military hierarchy. And then came Operation Barbarossa. On June 22, 1941, Germany invaded the Soviet Union, the largest military operation in human history. Von Rundstedt commanded Army Group South, driving into Ukraine toward Kiev and beyond. The early months were devastating for the Soviets. Entire armies were encircled and destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of prisoners were taken. Kiev fell. The Wehrmacht drove deep into Soviet territory. And behind the advancing German armies came the killing units, the Einsatzgruppen, the mobile death squads that murdered Jews, Soviet commissars, and anyone deemed an enemy of the Reich. This is the part of von Rundstedt's story that demands to be confronted directly. He knew what the Einsatzgruppen were doing. Every senior commander on the Eastern Front knew. The massacres were not secret. They were reported up the chain of command. At Babi Yar in late September 1941, just outside Kiev, which had just fallen to Army Group South, 33,000 Jews were murdered in 2 days. Von Rundstedt's forces had just taken that city. The Einsatzgruppen operated in his area of command, and there is no serious historical evidence that he made any significant effort to stop them or to protest through official channels. He looked away. He kept his focus on the military campaign, and that looking away made him complicit in what happened in the territory under his command. He was relieved of command in late 1941 after a dispute with Hitler over a tactical retreat. Hitler wanted to hold ground at all costs. Von Rundstedt believed a strategic withdrawal was necessary to preserve the army. He was right militarily. Hitler fired him anyway, and then called him back again in 1942. Because Hitler kept doing this with competent generals he personally disliked. He needed them too much to leave them in retirement. Von Rundstedt was appointed Commander-in-Chief West. He was now responsible for the defense of Western Europe, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, the Atlantic Wall. He was supposed to stop an Allied invasion that everyone knew was coming, but nobody knew exactly when or where. And he disagreed deeply with the strategy for how to do it. Erwin Rommel, who commanded the forces along the coast, believed the invasion had to be stopped at the beach, that the Allies had to be hit immediately before they could establish a beachhead, because Allied air power would make it impossible to move reserves quickly once the battle was underway. Von Rundstedt believed the opposite. He thought the panzer reserves should be held back, used in a massive counterattack once the main Allied landing site was identified. The two men argued. Hitler, as usual, compromised in the worst possible way, splitting the reserves and giving neither commander what he needed. On June 6, 1944, the Allies landed in Normandy. D-Day, the largest amphibious invasion in history. And in the critical hours of that day, when German panzer reserves might have made a difference, they were held back waiting for Hitler to wake up and authorize their release. Hitler slept late that morning. Nobody dared wake him. By the time the reserves were authorized to move, Allied air power was making every road movement a nightmare. The moment had passed, the beachhead held, and the war in the West entered its final phase. Von Rundstedt was relieved again in July 1944, after telling a reporter that the only sensible thing Germany could do was make peace. Hitler was furious. Von Rundstedt went home again, and then, in September 1944, Hitler called him back one more time, because Germany was now fighting desperately on all fronts, and there was simply nobody better available. His final major operation as a commander was the Ardennes Offensive in December 1944, known in the West as the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's last gamble. A massive armored attack through the Ardennes forest, the same terrain where Germany had achieved its great victory in 1940, aimed at splitting the Allied armies and capturing the port of Antwerp. Von Rundstedt was nominally in command, but the plan was essentially Hitler's. Von Rundstedt thought it was unrealistic. He thought Germany no longer had the resources to sustain such an offensive. He was right. The offensive initially shocked the Allies and made significant gains, but it ran out of fuel, ran out of momentum, and ultimately failed. The last German strategic reserve had been spent. After the Bulge, the end was only a matter of time. Von Rundstedt was finally relieved for the last time in March 1945. He was 69 years old. He was ill. He was exhausted, and Germany was collapsing on every front. He was captured by American forces on May 1st, 1945, in Bad Tolz, in Bavaria. He was found in a hospital. He offered no resistance. There was nothing left to resist with. He was held as a prisoner of war and was expected to face trial at Nuremberg or in a subsequent proceeding. The British in particular wanted to prosecute him for his role in the Commando Order, Hitler's order that Allied commandos captured behind German lines were to be executed rather than treated as prisoners of war. There was also the question of his role in the execution of Allied prisoners and his command responsibility for atrocities committed in the territories under his control. But von Rundstedt was never tried. His health was genuinely poor. He had serious heart problems. The prosecutions were repeatedly delayed, and eventually, in 1949, he was released. He went home to West Germany. He lived quietly. He gave occasional interviews. He wrote some memoirs. He received visits from former enemies, including British officers who had fought against him and respected him as a professional soldier. He died on February 24th, 1953, in Hanover. He was 77 years old. And here is the question that his life leaves us with. Gerd von Rundstedt was not an ideological Nazi. He was not a true believer. He did not share Hitler's racial obsessions or his apocalyptic vision of Germany's destiny. He was a professional soldier from an old military tradition who served a criminal regime because serving was what he did. Because the alternative, in his mind, was unthinkable. You did not refuse. You did not resign. You served. But that choice to serve, that professional loyalty, divorced from moral judgment, had consequences. Real consequences. The armies he commanded conquered and occupied territory where millions of people were murdered. The strategies he executed served the goals of a genocidal state. The orders he followed and the orders he gave contributed to one of the greatest catastrophes in human history, and he faced no legal accountability for any of it. There is a word that military historians sometimes use for men like von Rundstedt. They call them apolitical, as if being apolitical in the service of Adolf Hitler was somehow a neutral position. It was not neutral. Choosing to serve is a choice. Choosing not to look is a choice. Choosing to keep your head down and focus on the military problem in front of you while the world burns around you is a choice. Von Rundstedt made those choices every single day for 6 years. He was a brilliant commander. He was one of the most capable military minds of the 20th century. And he put all of that brilliance in service of a regime that murdered millions. That is his legacy. All of it. The tactical genius and the moral failure together. You do not get to separate them. Thank you for watching. If this video was worth your time, please hit the like button. It helps the channel more than you might think. Subscribe if you are not already with us. We cover stories like this every single week. And if there is someone you want us to cover next, drop a name in the comments below. We read every single one. See you in the next video.